So, see any good moves lately? Welcome back to See Any Good Moves Lately. My name is Joey Olberding, and today here to talk about episode 4 of Survivor 48, a pretty wild one. I have a very special guest with me, a fantastic individual whose name could best be described as Lauren. How are you doing, Lauren?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the compliment. That is my name, so we're off to a good start.
That's pretty true. I got to say, this last episode of Survivor 48 is a crazy one. Really interesting stuff, and we're gonna get all to it. But I want to ask you first, Lauren. What are your thoughts on the season so far? Going into this episode.
I'm really liking it. From the start, I really liked all of the people, and I think the people make the show. So, kind of from the get go, I was like, even if we don't see anything new, we're gonna get some good stories, with some good interactions. Even the folks who I don't know if I'd necessarily have much in common with or get along with day to day, I would go for beers with every single person in this season, and
Yeah.
I think that's a casting dream, and so I was excited, and week to week they have not disappointed in the least. So I'm loving this season.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun. I gotta say, most of the time with these like pre-merges, there isn't a ton of like exciting stuff that happens. But between this episode, which we'll get to, and last episode with the whole Justin, losing his vote and the chaos around that, like stuff is happening. Stuff is happening. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's always so interesting because will any of those things have any weight in a final tribal council? Hard to say
yeah.
because it really depends who's around when, it's either being used as part of a resume or what have you. And so sometimes these big moves happen and they still are footnotes by the end of a season, but the way this has shaped relationships, and I think we'll be talking about it in terms of the way it's shaped the game well beyond this season. But I feel like they're going to have ripple effects throughout. I think like we'll get into it, but Kyle and Camilla, really big move, that could be used as a target on them down the road, as much as it could be used as part of a resume. So it's just really interesting to see how it's going to play out.
It's a very good point, and it's something that I've thought about a fair amount. But like, I can't think of a time, honestly. Like this move is insane, and we'll get to it. But I can't think of a time in Survivor history where like a pre-merge, big move made in the pre-merge, had legitimate ramifications on a person's case in Final Tribal Council. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much game between now and the end, but obviously, and I mean, we'll get to it, but I mean, Kyle and Camilla pulling off this move is amazing for their games, and sure, it could make them look like threats down the road, but all I think it does is sets them up strategically and in game wise in a better position than obviously they would be if one of them went home. So yeah.
That's for sure. And yeah, I think if by the end of it, if when these groups merge and they're still there and their alliance has the numbers because of that moment, and then that leads to positioning in a final tribal, this will absolutely get harkened back to as a big move. And again, whether that's to cut them because they're threats
Yeah.
or for them to try and win it all, we have yet to see. But yeah, this was like ripple effects and so fun to watch.
Yes, certainly. But let's get into it. Let's start talking
Yeah.
about the episode. But of course, we can't talk about this episode without talking just a little bit about last episode. Because we get back to camp after Justin is exiled. The pizza is taken out of the oven. Um, and he is gone. And Cedric, all of a sudden, goes from, having the power to determine who goes home and who stays to basically being the target because Say is so upset at him over everything that happened. So, can I get your thoughts on that, if anything?
Yeah, first of all, the one silver lining to Justin going when he did is that happened before he had to eat any of the Fijian pizza, because I think he would have been incredibly disappointed from what I understand.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, Cedric did this to himself in more ways than the obvious. The
Mhm.
obvious being that it could have been a very clean cut, easy vote, say values loyalty, had he stuck with her the whole way through, if he was going to make this decision anyways. Obviously they go back tighter than ever, but beyond just that, his stipulation for keeping Say was that she promised to work with Mary. So this idea that the three of them return, and he has insisted that the other two in their three-person tribe stick together. I mean, I get what he was saying, but it's very comedic that they followed through on that, and Say was very much considering sticking with Mary here. And hey, now the women have the power here, and very interesting. And what a fun segment! Everybody wanted that team up. They gave us what we wanted, and I just loved the awareness of it. Like, they knew
Yeah.
that that was the fun thing too. I loved Say's note for Mary to let her know, and I loved that Mary appreciated it, and the way they talk about uh, game versus real life and just respecting each other's competitiveness. It was a really lovely segment, and I'm glad that we got it. Whether there's payoff in the end or not, in terms of if we see them come together again or not.
Yeah, no, it's a really fun dynamic, and you can tell that the season, I wouldn't say is going to be shaped by it, but at least in this early stage in the pre-merge is definitely shaped by it. I mean, there really aren't a lot of comparisons to it. Like I haven't really seen too much like this where it's like bitter rivalry. They're doing everything against each other into budding friendship and relationship in the game. The only thing that strikes me as being somewhat similar is in Survivor Guatemala with Bobby John and Jamie, who are clashing, and they're yelling at each other and they're barking at each other like dogs. And then when they both get voted out, they're on the jury being like, "Yeah, I hate Stephanie. We're friends now." So yeah, I mean it's great. I'm not saying that's necessarily what's going to happen, but yeah, I think it's fun regardless.
Yeah, I saw some comparisons even to like Bruce and Katura, but they never switched to being buddies. It was sort of
Yeah.
an alliance of necessity, or like, could we
Mhm.
work together for this vote sort of thing. Whereas now, I mean, we're at the point where Jeff has been saying this is the season of duos, and I'm genuinely like, wait, are Say and Mary a duo? Like, is that
Yeah.
the duo we're talking about? Because how great would that be? Yeah.
It would be great. Especially, I mean, I still can't get over it, especially since Cedric, as you said, just did it to himself. I mean, I'm not over it. I haven't been over it since I saw it. I don't think I'll ever get over it. I don't think I'll ever get past this hurdle in my life of thinking about what Cedric did in the last episode. Just voting for everybody on his tribe, and
Yeah.
then I don't know, because like there's no expectation of a swap, right? You can't expect a swap. Swaps don't happen very often in the new era. The only other true swap was in Survivor 45, I believe. And Cedric's like, we got to work together. And even if like you believe that, okay, he means that in like a team aspect, like rah rah, we're all gonna do this together. Like, yes, it's us, Wahoo. Justin's better at challenges. I'm pretty sure that's pretty much seen, at least better than Mary, theoretically. Say certainly is a more chaotic force in challenges. Um, Justin, if nothing else, has an innate knowledge of pizza, if that ever needs to come into play. And certainly seems to be a calmer presence, which I assume would be good in challenges. But the more I think about it, the more perplexed I am by the decisions. But I'm certainly happy in the sense that I love Say and I love Mary and I love watching both of them. I still just don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, and I think initially when I didn't understand what the end result of this deadlock voting was going to be, because I hadn't
Mhm.
realized that if it would eventually get to a point where he would get to make a singular decision. So initially I was completely confused. Then I was like, okay, if he is determined to keep Justin, then this is how he does it, right? And that does absolutely make sense. But I also would have completely respected him just sticking with Say. It's just he just kind of needed to pick one, because what we also know about Say is that she is going to take that
Yeah.
personally. She might forgive, but she will not forget from a strategic standpoint either, that he was willing to double cross her there twice. And so it's, and on top of it, and I didn't catch this, that this was something that they mentioned this week that I didn't even catch in terms of the dynamics in tribal council last week, was the moment where it did feel personal for Say, and because she felt such a connection and such a loyalty to Cedric, that she felt genuinely hurt and blindsided, and it was Mary who was comforting her
Yeah.
in a very real outside the game moment. But of course, nothing's truly outside the game. And Say
Mhm.
even mentioned it here, was that she was the one that was there for her. And I think I've seen people talk about it. I think we did actually see a little bit of it last week. And again, I just missed it, where at the end of it all, she thanks Mary. Like, I had thought she was thanking Cedric for keeping her, but she actually sort of thanks Mary for sort of being there for her emotionally in that moment. So he really managed to bring Say and Mary together in a way that will not benefit him at all whatsoever. So it's great TV. And he
Yeah.
seems like a lovely guy.
He
And I
does. Yeah.
cannot wait to hear his perspective of all of this when the time comes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but that by itself is not the only thing necessarily bringing these people together in a weird way, because Cedric and Say, they seem like they're sort of moving away from one another, but the Survivor gods have other intentions,
Yes.
because we get our tribe swap, something that once again we haven't really seen in the new era that much, but I'm very glad, because as will be shown, the dynamics of these tribes are so fun and
Yeah.
so dynamic. I don't know, they're fun, they're good. So yeah,
I, and I love that it is purely chance. I mean, I love and hate it. For the players, if you get a rough swap, that is so brutal. But I love it in that, not that I think that there's ever production interference or anything, but I
Mhm.
love that also production does not know. Like, they go into that not knowing what the rest of the day or subsequent
Yeah.
days are going to hold, because they do not know what combinations of people are going to end up together. And the Survivor gods tend to treat us pretty well with these swaps, because we always get some really interesting combinations of people and some really interesting things happening.
Yeah, no, I love a tribe swap. I love one where you can see people pick up the buffs, and like that it is pure, basically pure random chance. Like, maybe it's a bit hypocritical, but like I love stuff like that, because no matter how bad of a spot it seems like you can be in, for instance, we'll get into it, but like Bianca, on the new Siva tribe, like she's in a rough spot, right? Like, you can always find it out, whether it be by just winning the immunity challenge or finding a crack. Like, it's possible. But at the same time, I hate the random chance aspect of something like the rolling the dice that Justin had to
Yeah.
go through,
Yeah.
especially when he had to go to tribal that night. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting balance, but I think Survivor does it well with the tribe spots specifically. And yeah,
Yeah. I always, anything like that where it does come down to luck and chance, I think uh, if it's something that is precedented, if it's something that has been done before, and so players can take into account that this may happen at any time, um, I I like it much more, because you can't necessarily prepare for it, but you know what game you're playing,
yeah,
and I think that's important. And to your point with the dice, yeah, I don't love that. I also don't love that the tribes knew enough at that point from the journeys to know that, well, I guess it depends who came back and told them about what happened, but to know that things seem to that you can't back out, and there's a good chance you could lose your vote, because then tribes are sending people kind of to their death if they're
yeah.
sending them on the journey when they're also going to tribal council. Like, I very much feel like, the although who was it that sent Justin, because that was actually a
It was
tribe who,
Bianca.
yeah, okay. So actually, in fairness, that tribe didn't know that you can't opt out. Or no, I guess Bianca would. But anyways, they they sent Justin, I feel like, hoping that he would go home. And then they got their wish. So that feels extra. Whereas the randomness of a tribe swap, nobody has an upper hand. Nobody is deciding who gets the random chance decision thing happening to them. They're all in the same boat. And so I like that better, I guess. So I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's totally fair. Yeah. Um, but let's talk about these new tribes because these new
Yeah.
tribes are all interesting in their own ways. So first, I alluded to them, the new Siva tribe, which consists of Say and Cedric, Mitch and Chrissy, and then Bianca in the middle with no vote. Um, Very interesting. You have Say and Cedric who are actively sort of fighting against each other, or at least Say is fighting against Cedric at
Yeah.
this point. Mitch and Chrissy, who like we haven't seen a connection between them
Nothing.
at all.
Yeah.
They seem kind of on the opposite sides of their original tribes. And then Bianca, who is honestly just kind of there, and it seems like an easy potential target, but she also seems to be maybe the most strategically sound out of anybody in the tribe. So it's interesting, for sure.
It is interesting. And she's in a position where she she can't be a swing vote because she doesn't have the vote,
Hmm.
but she really can't tell them she doesn't have that vote because it just makes her so much more of an easy target. And long term, it makes sense to get rid of somebody numbers wise from her original starting tribe. I apologize. What's the name of the purple tribe? It's the one I don't remember.
Uh, Loggy, I think it's
Loggy,
Loggy.
yeah. So, original Siva is aware of numbers and wanting to make sure that they go into a merge with more people than original Loggy. And so that, regardless of how people get along, is going to be on their minds. So the moment she shares she doesn't have a vote, she becomes the vote. However, Say is willing to cut Cedric, seemingly. Cedric thinks that they're super loyal, which is really fun
Yeah,
to kind of see how that plays out. And I think Chrissy and Mitch, yes, I agree that no real allegiance there, but I do think they have numbers in mind. So I think for Bianca's sake, she's not to jump the gun, but she's very lucky that they did not have to go to tribal council that night, I think.
yeah, I agree. It's interesting because let's just talk about this tribe because we did see a little bit of them after the swap, even though they didn't go to tribal council, and it's interesting because Say basically says to, I believe she says to Bianca, she says, "Hey, don't trust Cedric. Don't go to him. Don't trust him," which to me is like maybe Say isn't actively targeting Cedric right now, but like if they do go to tribal council, I see a very real world where Chrissy and Mitch can convince Say to flip on Cedric, and Bianca doesn't have to
Yeah.
tell them about her vote, which I think is probably the ideal thing to do. It's the same thing that Justin accurately did 2 episodes ago. Unfortunately, Mary played the shot in the dark, so it ended up backfiring on him, but not through any fault of his own.
Hmm.
So I think that's the ideal world for Bianca is Say flipping on Cedric, which at this point seems more like when will it happen rather than a will it
Right.
happen. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that, and it's so interesting because I think there's been so much talk about what has happened to people when they haven't told people about their advantages, but I think it's very specifically when they haven't told their alliances about
Mhm.
advantages. And at this point in the game, Bianca is a number for people. It's not an alliance per se. And I think with all the other factors to be considered, if she were to share that information, she'd be gone. But if she can work it right, and I do think she has the social prowess to do it, I agree. I think that would be how to do it, would specifically to have everybody else vote for Cedric. So it would be tough. I think the not going to tribal is her best bet, but
Yeah.
that is the one world where she would stay.
Yeah. No, so far, I liked your point that you mentioned about the advantages and how it's sort of saying to people, hey, tell your alliance about this. Because so far, here in Survivor 48. Like the life lesson has been to tell people about your advantages, which feels like the opposite of what's normally true in Survivor between Justin and now
Mhm.
unfortunately Thomas going home. It's interesting to me because like as somebody who obviously hasn't played, to me it's like telling people about your advantages is such a risk, like because that stuff spreads so easily. Which always leads me in the boat of like, hey, just use your advantages, just burn them. Having an advantage be a target on your back is worse than not having one. But it's interesting because this season is sort of saying the opposite in a sense. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think it's interesting.
And I think I think if you can, if there is a way for you to withhold information without blatantly lying about the details of a
Mhm.
journey, maybe that's fair. But I think the moment somebody tells a lie, and this came up in this episode, people are gonna cross-reference and fact check that, and it's gonna work against you, especially if you're lying to your alliance, because if you know, whether you've lost a vote, whether you have an advantage and are lying about what transpired, other people were there on the journey. If somebody goes to a journey alone, they can do whatever they want to do. But if other people have had that same experience and are sharing notes, I think it's only going to get you in trouble eventually. And you don't know when there's going to be a tribe swap. You don't know when the merge is happening. And if it's something where you're thinking, I want to keep this long term, if you think that there's even a chance you want to use this to help the alliance you're currently in, I think it's better that they know about it sooner rather than later, because then they'll believe that that was your plan all along and it wasn't your plan based on circumstance and convenience later.
Yeah, I mean, well, the whole thing about the Siva tribes, or the original Siva tribe, I should say, at this point has all been about sharing your
Hmm.
advantages and being open about what you have. Mitch and Camilla both revealed the fact that they had extra votes. Kyle didn't reveal the fact that he had an idol, but I mean, Camilla knew about it. And
Hmm.
they were able to use that information, that open information, to stage one of the biggest moves in probably the pre-merge Survivor history.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really says something about being open about your stuff because it's one thing to be open about it. It's another to be open and then not use your idols, which is what happened throughout
Yeah.
the entirety of Survivor 46. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Actually, 2 points to that very quickly because I'll forget it otherwise. I thought it
Yep.
was very smart of Kyle to reference Survivor 46 when he played his idol. When he said, I saw Survivor 46,
Yeah.
and this is important because what he was saying was that he didn't think he was the one going home, but I better do this just in case, which means that if anybody else had anything, they maybe wouldn't feel like they needed to play it because they'd still assume that Kyle's vote was on Camilla. And so I thought that was just
Interesting.
very astute of him. But yes, to your point of yes, obviously, if somebody finds an idol and nobody else knows about it, you don't need to wave that thing around. But the fact that Kyle had already shared that with Camilla, the fact that they sort of worked on that together meant, and who knows how much we actually, maybe they did have a chance to sort of hatch their plan. The way it was shown to us was that they sort of used telepathy to figure out what they were doing.
Mhm.
But if they didn't get much of a chance to talk, that trust was there, because they knew about each other's advantages. And so the game they started playing and the web of lies they started weaving, they knew what the other was doing and they knew they were working together. And so that really worked out for them. So I think it's a case by case basis, but I think if you truly have a number one, it's probably most of the time better to be open about this sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it really also speaks to the power of, these swaps because how lucky is it that Camilla and Kyle were able to stick together when, essentially they're number ones to each other. If they weren't then, they certainly are now. That they were able to have that connection. Like if it was Mitch and Chrissy that was swapped over that tribe with the California girls, like they probably would have gone after each other and they probably wouldn't have been able to stage something like that. So I guess it speaks to really working with everybody in your tribe.
Hmm.
But yeah, even still, it comes down to luck a lot of the time. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and how fascinating that that was the tribe where basically the tightest alliances ended up at, and then the other tribes were sort of these kind of almost comedic combinations, like the
Yeah.
people from original tribes that ended up together, Say and Cedric after what had just transpired, Eva and Star, I think even Mitch and Chrissy, Charity and David, people who where either one of them didn't have a clear picture of where the other one's head was actually at, or people who just they knew that they weren't working together. And then this was the most cohesive tribe on paper, and it certainly led to the most interesting tribal council we could have gotten. So
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about this other sort of chaos tribe here that we have. The new Logi tribe ends up being Eva and Star, already pretty insane. David and Charity, and then you have Mary once again at the bottom theoretically, or at least not in a great spot. I mean, they could pick her off theoretically. I don't think that's going to happen, but no easy allies there. But
Mhm.
even Star are absolutely against one another. David is very against Charity, as we were told in this episode. So I really don't know what's gonna happen with that tribe, honestly.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is that as much as the episode made it look like, well, I felt like the editing kind of made it look like Charity thought she and David were tight, and then it sort of switches to David being like, "No, not at all. She was actually going to be the first to go." And what I actually think is more accurate is that Charity was trying to present this image that she and David were tight.
Yeah,
I think she knew he was not her closest ally on that
yeah,
tribe by any means. And I think David's idea that Charity was clearly on the bottom of the tribe, I don't know this for sure, but I kind of get the sense that that was outdated information. I think he still believed it, but I do think Charity had made some inroads with people.
yeah,
So I'm not even sure that that was necessarily true, but it's very interesting because everybody there but Charity really likes David. They are drinking the chocolate milk. And so his perception is reality. If he's saying, she's on the bottom, I'm okay to get rid of her, then Charity's in trouble. So I just thought that was very interesting there. And then with Eva and Star, it's I wish we'd seen more conversations with Star because I feel like they were probably very similar to the conversations people were having with Eva,
yeah,
because each of them thought the other one was on the bottom and was going to be the first boot when their original tribe went to tribal. So very interesting stuff for sure.
yeah. I do think what you said about David is pretty true, and the fact that everybody's drinking the chocolate milk. Part of that I think is just here's David, this huge guy with the most muscles you've ever seen in your life. And it's like a guy like that, like there's no incentive to get rid of him, like in the pre-merge, especially when he's not like a figure of chaos. Like he's making the merge. There's no way he goes home. Because he's a big
Yeah.
target. He's a big guy and he's a big target. And so I guess it makes sense to me that everyone's sort of rallying around him and being like, "Hey, I want to work with you." Dot 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 until we merge, and then we'll see. Um, yeah, I think it makes sense. I'm a little surprised that like everybody is on the David train, but I mean,
I think
there you go.
Charity's surprised as well.
Yeah,
That was sort of the impression that I got. And it was interesting because it very much seemed to be his personality that they were touting as the reason why they so
which
liked David.
yeah,
And I just thought that was so interesting. I loved the way that he and Eva matched each other's energy,
yeah,
just with excitement and everything. And I think I was really worried for her. And when I say worried, usually I mean in terms of just a rough tribe swap with numbers and everything. But in this case, maybe for the first time I can ever think of in a tribe swap, I was like genuinely worried about her as a person and how she would do with this drastic upheaval, no longer having her person in Joe. I was like, I just hope she's okay. And I was almost worried she was going to try and find another person really fast, and that it would not work out for her. So to see her just bonding with people and finding similar interests and them that matching that level of excitement and people talking game with her, I was just relieved, just on like an emotional level. Like
Yeah.
I was just really relieved for her there, because I I could feel her stress during that tribe swap moment on the mats. And it I felt stressed. I was just worried for her as a human. So
Yeah. Eva is a truly fascinating personality on Survivor. I mean, there's never really been anybody like her on Survivor. Certainly nobody openly autistic like
mhm,
her. But I think she's just fascinating in the sense that in a game where everybody else, or mostly everybody else, is being extremely strategic and, really, really playing, into the deception of it all, especially this season. Here's Eva, who is obviously wearing her heart on her sleeve, and really like she's not really a deceptive person. Like she tried to deceive Star a little bit last episode, but not really. It's very surface level stuff. And I think there's something to that. I think there's something to the quote unquote predictability of somebody, or at least the
mhm,
capacity that what they are saying is telling the truth. Um, but at the same time, like it's tough to know if that's good to have in an ally when Eva is so obvious about who she's working with and who she's targeting. So it doesn't really shock me that in some senses she was on the bottom and maybe would have been the first to go from Lagi if they had gone to tribal council. But I do root for her. I hope she does well in the game, and I'm glad that she found David.
mhm.
I think it's a fun pair, which is
Yeah,
good.
no, it
Yeah,
is. And I agree. I think she comes with a level of self-awareness about the fact that she can't tell when people are lying to her,
yeah,
that certainly gives her a leg up on people who aren't aware that they can't tell when people are lying to her. So I think that's a good start. And I thought, although the whole situation with Star where she kind of tried things out, although it didn't do her any favors, I thought it was so interesting that she did it almost as more of, I know she was talking about it as a test of Star, but I also got the sense she was almost testing herself a little. Like she was like, this I know I'm not very good at judging when people are lying, but I know that everybody else knows that Star has found this thing. And so I want to see if she tells me about it, because if she doesn't, I know she's lying. And it was almost like she almost was treating it like a science experiment. And I just loved the way she was thinking there, and just that she was sort of pushing her own limits and testing herself and trying something. And it all came from a place of self-awareness. It didn't go super well. It didn't do her any favors, especially with Star. But I think the willingness to try that is why she's on this show, because I think that that's really, really interesting. As someone who, she said she does not like change, she's not sticking to only what she knows. She's really trying to put herself out there, and I it's fun to watch, and I'm really rooting for her because of it.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, this is maybe. Oh, I find it interesting in terms of Eva sort of has like these one people. She had Joe and she had David. She doesn't necessarily have anybody else that we know that she's working with strategically. And it's interesting because if you're somebody like, I don't know, maybe a Charity looking at her, or maybe, a Mary, like who isn't necessarily on the ins with her, like is Eva somebody that you want to have stay in the game, or is it somebody that like, well, they're not actively working with me, should I get rid of her? But at the same time, Eva is a very sort of quote unquote predictable survivor force in the fact that you know who she's working with and will probably be a bigger threat than you come the end of the game just because of her story and because of the fact
Mhm.
that she's a very physical player and will probably do very well in the immunity challenges. I would say that you'd want to keep Eva around and try to take out somebody a little more obviously strategic, like a Star or maybe a Charity or somebody like that. I don't know, but maybe that's just because I like Eva, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it could go a few different ways. I think it, and talking about her story and everything, and I obviously never want anything to sort of anybody to be to come down to their story, and I think sometimes that is used more than it needs to be, because everybody that's there has a story of some kind. But I do think that the minute that people better understand her, if she were to open up and kind of share her experience a little more, and things that like even just in terms of how close she is with Joe, that would feel like, I think, a lot less of a threat if people understood where that came from. I think that could benefit her in the short term, but then people know her story and people do get afraid of people's stories, and that could be a detriment in the long run. Whereas if she manages to get through without sharing her story early on, then I think she might be underestimated. And then I think she could stick around for a while and then maybe not be the goat that people thought she was
Yeah.
when we get closer to the end. And so it's very interesting. I don't think that that is something she's considering at all. No, and I like that.
Yeah.
I think it would, the minute that you're withholding a story because you want to use it to win the game, I think you've lost the plot. But if it's, you're withholding a story because you just don't know if you can trust the people around you with that information for all sorts of reasons, because they use it against you because they say you're a threat, or they use it against you because they now know your vulnerabilities, I think that is incredibly fair, and that's what I feel like she's doing. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to see what happens with Eva.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The last thing that I want to happen is for Eva to reveal this to everybody, and then Eva, whether we see it in the edit or not, gets targeted for her, quote unquote, great story
Mm.
about being the first openly autistic player. So I mean, I don't know if this is like, I kind of just hope that Eva doesn't have to reveal that to everyone, that can sort of stay under the radar. I hope Joe doesn't reveal that to anybody in the game, or whatever else, because I feel like that would be sort of, well, I think it'd be gross to vote somebody out
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, and I don't want somebody to be reduced to their story there.
Exactly.
And there have been times where, like, I feel like but there have been times where, and it wasn't necessarily shown in the edit, but it was like, this, they're finding reasons to vote this person out because now they know if this person gets to the end, they will win because of their story alone. I think of Zeke. I very much
Yeah.
feel like you know what I mean? And so, and I don't like that. And when it's like, when people are so aware of that fact that that doesn't even become the reason they're voting them out because they don't want to look bad on TV, and they make up other reasons, like, it's just like, ugh, I don't like it. I don't want that to happen. I think what's also really interesting with Eva is that I I really doubt, like, she's certainly the first person who has shared that she's on the autism spectrum. She is not the first person to play
No.
Survivor who's been on the autism spectrum. And I think there have been people who have been eccentric enough or had idiosyncrasies that other people, and I'm sure this is the case with Eva too, have sort of picked up on that, and nobody on their tribe is diagnosing them or anything, nor should they.
Yeah,
But
sure.
they also recognize this person thinks differently than I do, and I need to take this into account for reasons A, B, and C. And so maybe it wouldn't even be as much of a reveal as I moments ago
Yeah.
was suggesting it might be. Maybe people would just be like, that makes sense, actually. That explains a lot. Moving on. So who's to say?
Yeah. It's impossible to say, but I will say, in terms of just the edit, I mean, regardless of whether or not it's fair, it feels like the edit has really focused in on Eva as quote unquote, the autistic survivor player. And I don't know if I love that, but I feel like most of what we've gotten from her, regardless of whether that is true or not, has been relatively accurate to how she's played the game. In terms of her talking about her own
Mhm.
experiences, I think it's been good, and I've enjoyed that. But I would be surprised if, say for instance, Eva gets to the end and she doesn't reveal that fact. You know what I mean? Because it's basically her survivor game. Is her
Yeah.
survivor game has been her identity as a person
It
with autism.
It
So
is a huge part of her experience, and I think people have, if there are things, if there are reasons why this game is harder for you than everybody else, and you get to the end despite that, you absolutely should share that.
mhm.
And because that's very different than somebody having a story back home that they want to bring into it. It's like, but that didn't impact your game necessarily. I mean, well, I take that back because I think obviously emotional ties to a story back home being a big distraction could absolutely impact your game.
Yeah.
So no, I take that back. But I just feel like we are seeing the ways that her social game is impacted by this, and she's aware of it. And if she can find ways to kind of work around that or improve certain skills to sort of find those ways to compensate because she knows herself really well, because I think self-awareness is so key for Survivor in general.
Mhm.
She should absolutely be touting that at the end if she
Yeah.
gets there.
And I definitely think that among the players, there's a big difference between something like Eva's story and someone like David's story, who we've also gotten a lot of with, him living in a
Yes.
trailer in his parents' front yard and having a girlfriend who broke up with him because I guess he doesn't have $1 million yet, and other such things. But I feel like David's been so open about that story, and if he makes the end, I don't think anybody's going to be like, "Well, I got to reward David with
Right.
$1 million for
Yeah.
this story." I think it's more like, "Dang, that's a weird story, David.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing."
Yeah. Well, and I think, if people don't know much about the entertainment industry and he's sharing that he's a
Sure.
stuntman, people might incorrectly assume that he's not hurting for money. And so, finding one way or another to share that in fact he does not have a whole lot of money, I think is actually important. I don't think it would get people to vote for him to win the game, but if they thought he had a lot of money and people were deciding between him and somebody else, that could be a reason why they voted for somebody else. I feel like we have seen that before, again, not outwardly stated. So I think probably that makes sense. But yeah, if he thinks that's his story that's gonna win him $1 million, I think he'll be disappointed.
Yeah. I think honestly, for the most part, like modern Survivor juries, or really just juries in general, are able to see past, like the financial situation of players and look into their actual gameplay. If Survivor was all about giving the person who most needed the money, then Dreams would have won Survivor Fiji instead of Earl. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? But he didn't get a single vote. So I think for the most part, the juries are able to see past those stories, but at the same time, the new era is so defined by the final tribal council and the speech you give, like Marianne with her advantage and really, her final big move being the reveal of her idol. And Gabler's final tribal council basically winning him the game over Cassidy and things like that. Like the case somebody makes at final tribal council is honestly truly the biggest move that you can make in the game. I think for the most part, the best gameplay you can do is selling your game. And depending on how you frame your own story, I think you could swing votes. Um, and depending on if Eva does that, then I think that, a lot of people are writing her off as somebody who can't win. But I think there's a world if she plays well enough throughout the majority of the game as a good loyal ally and manages to, explain to everybody well, why the game's been harder for her. I can see a path where she wins. I can.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with that point, to be honest. I
Yeah.
think I agree that a strong final tribal council can take people far, but I do feel like most of the time the jurors go into a final tribal with somebody who they want to be able to vote for. And I think it's more frequent that a poor final tribal performance can lose you the game. And it's like if the player that they want to vote for gives even a mediocre final tribal performance, then it's okay. Because I feel like the Gabler example, there were certain things that I feel like people went in and for one reason or another, people kind of had this incentive to want to vote for Gabler or maybe just not vote for other people. Um, and it was sort of a if he says these things that's what I want to
Yeah.
hear. And so And I mean, I think looking even at the most recent season, in terms of what we saw in Final Tribal Council performance, we got a good performance from Rachel. We got a great performance from Sam. But I think people went in there feeling like Rachel should be the winner, and she didn't do or say anything that made them disagree with that. But and it became very clear that there was absolutely nothing Sam could do or say that would flip their vote. So I do think a lot of people are decided going in, or even if they're undecided, there's somebody that they want to vote for and they want that person to give them a reason. And so to that point, I think Final Tribal is critical. That is a skill that is so important. But what's also interesting is, yes, there's a story, but how would she be able to present that? Because I think being a good speaker in that setting is also really important. And
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes kind of too bad for people, because that isn't their strong suit, but they played this incredible game and they know what they were doing, but they weren't really able to articulate it. And sometimes they've lost because of that. I think of like Amanda Kimmel.
Yeah.
So it's Final Tribal is fascinating, and juries are fascinating. I completely agree with you that a Final Tribal performance is critical, but I don't necessarily think it's the deciding factor, I guess, or that a jury doesn't already know what they want to do.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and definitely something that could be argued. I mean, that you can't necessarily win a game with a final tribal speech, but you can definitely lose it. Think back to Marianne. The other side of that coin was Mike, who did not have a great final tribal council. Um, and as you said with Rachel, I mean, she seemed clear cut the winner, and then Sam had a great final tribal council. But like, if I was on the jury, I still probably would have voted for Rachel. I don't think I would have swapped my vote to Sam. So yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Charlie did not have a particularly great final tribal council in Survivor 46 compared to Kenzie, who I would say had a good one. I don't think she had an amazing one, but she definitely had a better one than Charlie. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
it's also what we see, right? The editors know who wins when they edit these shows, so it
yeah,
makes it so hard to assess this. But yeah, it'll be interesting. All of these people, I think, would be fun to watch in a Final Tribal Council. So again, it's why I'm loving this season, because sometimes by the time I get to a finale episode, it's just like I'm not sure there are going to be fireworks at this Final Tribal, but
sure.
I think with any of these people, we're going to get a good show.
Yeah. And by the way, we still have another tribe to talk about in
Yes,
this
we
tribe
do.
swap.
I mean, nothing happened with the other tribe, right? There's
Yeah,
nothing really to
nothing really
discuss.
happened with the new Vula tribe, consisting of all three of the California girls, being Joe, Thomas, and Cheyenne.
What luck?
Um,
What could go wrong, you know?
yeah, what could go wrong, right? And then you have Camilla and Kyle, from the original Siva tribe. And when I saw this tribe dynamic, this is something I literally said in my group chat to my brothers, and how wrong I was. I said, "There's no way that this tribe goes to tribal council," because to me, it's like they have arguably the strongest people in the game on their tribe. They have Shaheen, who's like, I don't know, genius level IQ or whatever. They have Thomas and Kyle, who are perfectly adept at challenges. Camilla, who seems like the best puzzle
Mhm.
person in the game, in my opinion. And then Joe, who's just like, he's a fire
He's a joke.
captain. He's,
Yeah.
he's yeah, he's muscle. So I thought there's no way that they're going to go to tribal council.
Yeah.
Um, but
As
looking at the tribe dynamics too was like, okay, well, how do you really make something interesting out of this? You know what I mean? But
for sure.
both
Look at I know.
fronts
Well,
made a
I
trip
mean,
by the way.
as Camilla said on the mat when the new tribes were revealed, was they had a lot of muscle, and she was pretty sure there were some brains too, which I thought was such a funny quote. And upon rewatch, Joe's face at that, when it's like kind of this moment of, was that an insult, is hilarious. So I quite enjoyed that.
I enjoy Joe's presence here because in the first few episodes, it was, here's this tender, sweet
Mhm.
guy in this big muscly dude's body. And then over the past episode or two, it's been like, yeah, Joe is that, but he also just doesn't like know what's happening really. Like and I appreciate that. Joe was the person that I picked as my winner pick episode one. Kind of just because I really like the conversation he had with Eva and
Mhm.
Joe's solidarity. I got to stick it out for the Joes out there. But
Right.
the more the season goes on, the less I'm inclined to think he's gonna find a way to win.
I feel like, and I said this to a few people in the first few minutes of episode 1, is that if Joe wins this game, they literally gave the winner away in the first 10 minutes of the game when they were showing the videos of everybody finding out they were gonna be on the season, and they ended the montage of videos with, like, his full reaction,
Yeah.
becoming emotional and telling them that, he's gonna do this for his kids and they're not gonna regret this, and like it was like if that guy, because looking at it it's like, oh, that's who wins, and it feels so obvious that it's like that almost means that can't be who wins because they just
Mhm.
gave it away. So I do not think that he'll win the game because of that, but also kind of looking at how everything has transpired, I agree with you. I Less and less does that seem to be likely. um I think, as much as I was worried for Eva, I do think like I was excited to see Joe without sort of that added layer of this person that he has promised to protect, essentially
Yeah.
protect in every form of the word in the game. And so I was like, it'll be interesting to kind of see what he does here. We ended up not seeing a ton from him just because there was sort of so much going on with that tribe, and he wasn't the one who eventually went home, so we weren't going to see a ton from him. But yeah, I think that is Joe away from Eva is interesting. um and I'm sure from his perspective, he probably wasn't even too upset that their tribe was going to tribal because it meant Evil was safe, and he probably thought they had it in the bag. So
Yeah.
again, we didn't get that confessional, but I feel like if I was in his shoes, that's probably how I would have felt. So this was, I think, quite the outcome
It,
for
yeah.
this tribe.
Quite the outcome indeed. I really enjoy Shaheen's presence, and I especially enjoyed him this way. Last episode, he was talking about the California girls, and he was mentioning, man, it's kind of stupid that we have three people from the same state on the same tribe, but hey, we're working together. And this episode, after the tribe swap, and they're like leaving and they're going to commercial, he says, it's pretty freaking ridiculous that we're all still on the same tribe. But okay, I'll
Yeah.
take it. And then it's especially funny because how we saw the other shoe drop there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just shows that all the great luck that you can have in Survivor can bite back at you if you don't do enough to secure. And I mean, Shari did a lot to secure what he
Yeah.
thought was a done deal, but I mean, you just can't predict everything in Survivor.
You just
So
can't. Yeah,
yeah.
sometimes other people have their own luck, and it's about what you do with the luck you have. And
Mhm.
Kyle and Camilla were nearly flawless in executing their plan based on the advantages that they happened upon in the game,
Yeah.
and that was the difference.
Yeah. So they go to these tribes, and we sort of talked about the dynamics that we saw already. Except with this new Vula tribe, where Camilla does something that I absolutely adored. As soon as they get to the beach, which is basically sit Joe and Shaheen down and be like, hey, so Thomas is lying about the fact that he didn't participate in the journey. We know that he had to. Immediately putting pressure on Thomas and immediately making him out to be a liar. I loved it. It was great, and it especially put pressure on the two of them because it wasn't like she went, "Hey, Shaheen, come with me. I need to tell you something." It's like, "Oh, by the way, your ally's lying to you." I loved it. I thought it was
Yeah.
great.
I suppose if this would be the one move that and it's so silly to say it because I mean, again, I think she's an incredible player. Maybe a few notes for her, but at the same time, I think it actually did work out really well for her, but very risky that then if the plan is eventually to make sure that the other three are voting for Kyle, to stick your neck out in that way, I think is interesting. However, imagine the others just jumped on this and wanted to get rid of Thomas, I mean, that would be great for her, I guess. Um, I almost wondered if bringing it up a little more subtly, like there was a moment where basically she was like, yeah, Mitch lost his vote, which also love that she lied about that.
Yeah.
And was like, he didn't have a choice. If she didn't bring up that she'd had that conversation with Star, and also shout out to the editors for taking us back to this conversation we hadn't previously seen with Star. Like that was just, it was
Yeah.
perfect.
Very good.
If she hadn't shared that with them and had just left it at, he didn't have, he didn't get to walk away, um, and let them kind of think about this, but not think that she's the one trying to influence how they feel about their ally. And it's just festering, just the mistrust just starts festering, just planting that seed. I wonder if that would have worked better. But I think what was really interesting was her entire story of saying, I'm on the bottom. And just this idea of her literally trying everything and throwing everything she has at the wall very much makes it seem like she is at the bottom. She is desperate. She's just trying to find a way to stay. And they're more likely to believe the story that, well, there's no way she and Kyle are plotting something. And so
Yeah.
I think it did work out really well. It actually, everything about Camilla and Kyle's performance actually made me think of a game that you and I both love, in Blood on the Clock Tower. It made
Yeah.
me think of times when you get caught in a room, you're on the evil team, and one of your fellow evils is there, but there are also some good players in the room, and you need to sort of communicate to your other evil player what you're trying to do, or some information or something, without actually saying it, or just and start spreading a narrative so that your fellow evil is kind of aware. And it just, that's what it kind of felt like. And I loved that Kyle sort of picked up on what she was doing and let her do her thing, and then played his role. And it was risky from her, but I at the same time, you kind of need to show people, for end game stuff, you need to show people that you're willing to make moves, right? So
Yeah.
I love that she came in with that information. I agree. I just worry that it probably made it harder for them to figure out who the vote was going to be on, because she was playing that hard.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's a good point. But I do also like the fact that Camilla was trying so many different angles, and it wasn't just
Hmm.
going full send on either the woe is me train or the hey you should get Thomas out train. And also shouts out to Kyle. I think Kyle did a really good job playing up the part of formerly overconfident person on the top of the tribe who now got sort of swap screwed and is trying to pretend like Camilla was a close ally of his.
Yeah.
He did a very good job at it. I loved when he was like, "Well, you weren't really gonna go
Yeah.
home. There's a
Yeah, it's like
lot that
that was up in the air. I think you said, or, like, yeah, and Shaheen bought that hook, line, and sinker, and
yeah,
even requoted it to the camera and was like, they hate each other.
yeah."
Yeah.
It was really good, especially when from what we can see, like it's all impromptu. Like it's all essentially improv. Like they're
Yeah.
they're going right off the cuff. All they're doing is going yes and coming up with this
Yes.
elaborate lie. Um and it's really good because like you see it. Like you can see the world where that happens on the Siva tribe, even though that obviously isn't true, like you can see a world where like, oh yeah, Kyle is this muscular, obviously smart guy.
Mhm.
You could see him at the top of the tribe. And Camilla is, sort of the meeker young woman. And like you can see throughout the course of Survivor history, like how many times has that happened? Like it's an
Absolutely.
easy story to believe because of
Yeah.
that.
Looking at the tribe, it was one of the reasons why I ended up I wasn't quick enough to draft Camilla in the fantasy pool I'm in, because I was like, I just worry that if this tribe goes to tribal council early, she just might be the one, the boot. And that's why I really respected her hustle early on to kind of create a new narrative and put that on somebody else, because I think she was aware that, just from an optics standpoint, that could be her. And
Yeah.
then that self-awareness then leading way to creating this story that the others very well could believe, because as you said, yeah, that's very believable just based on the history of what has happened in this show.
Yeah, I mean, self-awareness on Survivor is definitely one of the most important elements of being able to find like a niche and get to the end is being able to understand how different people perceive you. I think one of the people who did that best was the aforementioned Marianne. She had a really good knowledge of how people saw her as sort of
Mhm.
like an eccentric goofball and not really as a strategist, and she played that very well. I think most people who win Survivor have a good knowledge of their own threat level, especially in the new era. I think Dee did a good job at being able to be strategic and very openly out there, but still being able to be perceived as, one of many potential threats and not just one. And was sort of able to hide in the shadows of Julie and Austin. Gabler, once again, was able to play up the persona of being sort of like a weird goofball, like what is this guy doing here, instead of a strategist. And I think Camilla is also aware of that. I think, especially after this episode, she's definitely more openly, obviously strategic. And so maybe I worry a little more for her long term game now after she was able to
Mhm.
pull off such a big
Such a move.
move.
Yeah.
But inevitably, this whole plan works because she knows how she's perceived, and Kyle knows how he's perceived.
Right.
And I think it's great. I think it's
Yeah.
great.
And at the end of the day, maybe Kyle will be seen as the bigger threat. Like that'll be seen as
Yeah,
Kyle's move, and that for a start initially, I'm sure Camilla's fine with that if it puts the target on him and not her. I mean, obviously she doesn't want either of them to go yet,
yeah,
but yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And back to final tribals and self-awareness, I think kind of like what I was saying before, sometimes it's just revealing you do have the self-awareness is that missing puzzle piece at final
mhm.
tribal that makes a jury comfortable to vote for you. I think Gabler, again, that's what they wanted, and that's I think a key difference between like a coach and a Gabler, right?
Yes, I was about to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
For
yeah.
sure. I mean, Coach and South Pacific is one of my favorite seasons. It's a season I
It
think
is
is
my
permanently.
favorite season of
I,
Survivor. It
I
is
think it's.
famously my favorite season of Survivor.
I think it is an extremely underrated season. I think if you want to talk about dynamics and you want to talk about social relations, the South Pacific, it's hard to get
It's
any more truly fascinating than that season.
fascinating, and that's just it, is the word fascinating is the best descriptor of that season, and I wanna be very clear when I say that, you know, perhaps all coach needed to win that game was to demonstrate some self-awareness. Full credit to Sophie for
Yes.
knowing that he wouldn't. Like, knowing
Yes.
beyond a reasonable doubt that he would. Like, I think she played an excellent game too. She knew who she was playing with, and she had the self-awareness, and so because one of my favorite winners too, right? So
Yeah.
it's just really interesting in
Not
that
not
way.
to make this a South Pacific
I
podcast,
mean,
but
it can be.
I gotta talk about it a little bit. Like I love South Pacific because it is, it's quote unquote only hour-long episodes, but you by the end of the game get a sense of everybody's game. And when it
Mhm.
comes to the final four, between Ozzy, between Sophie, between Coach, and even between Albert, like you can see a case to be made for all of them because I think
Yeah,
truly, Albert included, I think all of them have played great games in their own way. Well,
yeah,
Ozzy played, his own game. I don't know if it's a
yeah.
great game, but he played his own game that would have been worthy of winning. And it's all about just the self awareness at the end.
Yeah, self-awareness and authenticity. And so
Yes,
Sophie was sitting there with both, possessing both, with people who, at least in the eyes of the jury, each of them greatly lacked one of those things,
yes,
right? And
yes.
and that's, I'm not trying to, I think Albert, I think he gets a bad rap, but
I do
again,
too.
perception is reality, and he had this used cars salesman feel to him that people were not responding well to, and maybe that comes back to self-awareness too, where he didn't realize that that was something people weren't liking, and he just kept revving it up.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was a fascinating season.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
should give it a rewatch. The other thing about
You
it is
really should.
it used to be one of those things where it's like there are certain elements of that season that feel really icky, and I think part of the reason that now I'm like, now it's just fascinating is that subsequent seasons have been far ickier.
Yeah.
And so now it's just like, no, it's just fascinating. It's just so interesting to see that play out. So.
It's a season that displays human nature, I think, about as well as even like
Mm,
season one of Survivor. I think it
yeah.
really gets down while still being
Yes.
strategically interesting. It gets down to the nitty gritty of like, you look at someone like Brandon Hance, like
Yeah.
here's this guy who is innately like almost not cut out for the game, but he's sort of finding a way. Like I don't know, but
Yeah.
everything about like the religion thing. I mean,
It was
it's
so
so
interesting.
fascinating. I love
Yeah.
it. I love that season.
Yeah, it's so good.
Um,
And then some of the most bizarre challenges and rewards we've ever seen on Survivor too. So there's
yes,
something for everyone.
the season with Nate talk about social and religion and all this type of thing also has a challenge where you get to watch hit Adam Sandler movie Jack and Jill. So I mean, it's
Exactly.
got a
Yeah.
little bit of everything.
And the meat challenge is by far the weirdest thing this show has ever done. So it's got
Yes,
everything.
it's got everything. Anyways, getting back to the
Anyways,
season
yeah,
at
sorry about
hand.
that.
That's an important detour. No, I think it
Yes.
was good. Um, we have a challenge, and the reward immunity challenge or whatever. It's sort of one of those classic ones where you do a big challenge, you run, you dig, you solve a puzzle. But to me, the most interesting thing about this challenge is not the challenge itself. It is the overconfidence of the new Vula tribe, where they come in and Shaheen announces, hey, this is going to be the first time that the Green Tribe wins a challenge. And, you know, I appreciate the confidence. It was sorely misplaced
Uh,
in this case.
See, I love it because I mean, the worst thing to happen once they decided to come in with that attitude was for them to get second, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Because if
Yeah,
they come in with that attitude and then follow through, then cool, you know? If they lose, great TV and we're talking about like, oh, they did not see that coming here. Getting second place. As soon as they did that, I was like, I just don't want them to get second cuz that'll just there's no story there. But I love that. And I don't even know if that was real confidence or if they were like let's come in with this air of confidence because that's something that this tribe hasn't really been able to do yet. I don't hate that. I think being pumped up is good, and I think that was a group that knew that if this went horribly wrong, at least it would be funny for TV. I genuinely think that crossed their minds.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's fair enough, but
Yeah.
still, it's unfortunate. I mean, hey, I was sitting there and I said, before they did that, I was like, this tribe is not losing a challenge. I have
Yeah.
to imagine they saw the people in the tribe and were like, well, we're surely more well put together than the other tribes, at least theoretically. But nope,
It
didn't
happened.
work.
It's like the Little Giants, right? There's that
Yeah.
one time that the underdog can beat you. So yeah.
Yeah, but the challenge is run, and it's a pretty standard one. And eventually Bula does in fact lose, and they have to go to tribal council. And I like the fact that we already know the plan that's in place. Like they
Mhm.
show us sort of what the dynamics are, and the fact that Camilla and Kyle are pretending to be against each other because that can have the confessional of Shaheen as we go in the commercial break being like, well, you don't want to say this on Survivor, but it seems like it'll be a pretty easy vote, or
Yeah.
something along those lines, and it is anything but, of
Yeah.
course.
No, I when that challenge was done and we knew who was going to try, like I was just like this. I think I even posted on good old Blue Sky that I was like, this is the worst possible outcome for any Survivor fantasy pool that I'm currently in, but the
Mm,
best for TV. Because I was just like, this, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm going to be sad to lose any of these people. But I know the plans that are brewing, and this is going to be more exciting than any other tribal council we would have gotten with the other two tribes.
for sure. And so we get back to camp, and they're trying to figure out these California girls. They're trying to figure out who should go home between Kyle and Camilla. And Shaheen's like, well, maybe we should go after Kyle because Kyle is obviously on the top of the original Siva tribe. And Thomas, who we haven't really talked about yet, Thomas is like, no, Camilla actively threw my name out when she said
Hmm.
that I was lying about the journey. Let's get her out. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think both are very valid. I do think that you're right in Camilla putting herself out there so much, put a bigger target on herself. But yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think what's interesting is so their reasoning also was they were like, she says she's at the bottom of the tribe. I feel like when we merge, she'd be more likely to flip and work with us.
Yeah,
And so it was more about numbers, I think. Um and I mean that was obviously what she was trying to sell. I do also wonder, and we saw no indication of this, so this is fan fiction that I am making up here. But I do wonder if the thought crossed Joe or Shaheen's mind that in the off chance that we are totally misreading this situation
hmm,
and Kyle and Camilla are thick as thieves and they pull one over on us, Camilla clearly has it out for Thomas. So if one of us were to go, it probably wouldn't be me. And if that crossed their minds at all, because it's also correct, then Camilla doing what she did and throwing Thomas's name out was all the more brilliant because um that being said, there wasn't much Joe or Shaheen could do. Thomas really was the only one who had any sort of power to
yeah,
change that play from what it ended up being. But I did wonder if that had crossed their mind, because I feel like I would go into a setting like that. It's like if everything went wrong and it was one of us going home, what can I do to make sure that I'm not the person that's most likely going to fall on? So, and their names hadn't been floated. So I do
yeah.
wonder about that.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a good point. Quite honestly, like I think the only person who wasn't truly vulnerable in going home was Joe, and that's
Mhm.
mostly because he's the most obviously physical guy,
Mhm.
and he doesn't have the same strategic capacity, or at least obvious strategic capacity that everybody else does. So I think he was the only one that was safe. I mean, when Kyle and Camilla were talking, they were deciding between Thomas and
Yeah.
Shahin. Like it wasn't a set in stone thing
No.
that they're going to go after Thomas. They were saying, hey, Thomas might have something because of his
Yeah.
journey lie, but Shahin is, he's Mr. Genius. He knows everything. So it was an interesting discussion. I know watching at home, I was personally like, I kind of hope they go after Shaheen, because if they don't go after him, like Shaheen's gonna be here for like a while. Like he's not going home anytime soon. I have too much faith in his game. Um, and Thomas, I enjoyed watching both of
Mhm.
them for the record, but I thought it would be a little more rich with all the confessionals we got from
Right.
Shaheen of him being overconfident and Thomas not really having any confessionals like that in
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah, until his Q&A session at tribal council, which
Yeah, yeah,
it was like, oh, uh-oh. But no, I agree. I think knowing that if this was going to work, it would have to be a total blindside. Getting rid of the person who might have something, I do think makes the most sense.
I agree. Yeah,
So I think that was very, very wise. And it was also very interesting from our perspective, knowing exactly what everybody had and knowing what their plan was that the moment voting started and Thomas didn't steal anybody's vote, we knew neither Kyle nor Camilla was going anywhere. Because they were going to use that third vote, they were like pretty much secure, because even if we got to a rock draw situation, they Kyle would be safe because of his idol and Camilla would be out of it because we'd only get to a rock draw situation if all the votes had gone on her. So it was brilliant.
yeah,
Genuinely the only thing that could thwart that plan was a vote steal, which somebody actually had.
yes.
I was most stressed leading up to the moment where voting started. Once voting started, I was like, I think I know where this is going. So that was really interesting too.
Yeah. I will say it's interesting because, Thomas does have this vote seal. He doesn't tell anybody about it. And, the conversation online has been, and we even talked about it earlier
Yeah.
in this podcast, is like, he should have told his allies, which I'm not saying that he shouldn't have. But in the case where Joe and Shai know about his advantage, I don't think they would ask Thomas to use it. I think they would have him hold on to it because in their world, it's Kyle, and Kyle doesn't have anything. And even if he does somehow have something, like there probably shouldn't be any reason to use it because Kyle's just going to vote for Camilla anyway. And stealing one of their votes is only going to alienate the other from the California girls and make them more likely to flip on them come the merge. So I don't know if even with the
Yeah.
knowledge that the steal a vote was out there, like it seemed so set in stone. It seemed like such a done deal.
Yeah.
Either way, that Kyle or Camilla was going home. So I don't know if it would have made a difference, really.
Yeah, it was truly, they would have to have been like, the only reason we'd need to play this is if we specifically have a situation where they correctly play an idol and have an extra vote. Like that is
Yeah,
the only world where a vote steal is needed. Which, so I agree with you. I hope that Thomas isn't up at night about this, because I think it makes all the sense in the world to not play it. Because what are
hmm
the odds? It's just really rough that it is also the one advantage that could have thwarted that plan,
yeah,
and he was the one that had it, and he went home. So just so tricky. And then that added element of, and I think his read was totally right, like because he hadn't told his allies about it, there's that added element of people will not trust me as much. Today might work out okay, but long term I'm definitely on the bottom of that alliance. And I no longer have my advantage if he were to
yeah.
use it just to be safe. So I think actually the steal a vote it is a blessing and a curse. Like it's incredibly powerful, but because it's something that you have to play before people vote, there's also that risk of it influencing the vote.
For sure.
And so it's I wouldn't love having that. I feel like it would be very stressful to have that, because people could switch up their plan when they realized that you had been dishonest and had been holding on to this
hmm
thing. Whereas, if you reveal that you lost your vote, or reveal that you had an extra vote, or reveal that you had an idol or something after the votes are cast, you at least have 3 days to smooth things over with people. They're not having to go and choose who to vote out immediately.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of speaks to what I was mentioning, earlier when we talked about this, or at least mentioned it, is the idea of like burning your advantages and just using them is
Hmm.
not the worst strategy in the world. In
No.
fact, I personally, I preach it. I
Hmm.
think it's especially in the pre-merge, it's just the smartest thing to do. Use your idols as soon as you can, especially if you think that you could be vulnerable. Use your extra votes, use your steal the votes, because inevitably once you get to the merge, what are people looking at? They're looking at threat level, and what's the most threatening thing in the game? It's advantages. So if you have an idol, like if Kyle never got to play his idol or didn't play his idol and blah blah in a
Hmm.
world where he doesn't go home, blah blah blah, it doesn't go to another tribal council, and all of a sudden it's the merge and he has an idol, like he's going to be targeted regardless of whether he plays it immediately or not because of the fact that he had one.
Hmm.
So I think it's good that he played it. Ironically, the fact that this move worked out for him and Kyle was able to pull off this big move, I think actually will help lower Kyle's threat level long term because he doesn't have an idol anymore, which I think is interesting. It's
Maybe.
something that you could argue,
Yeah.
but that's the way I
Yeah.
see it,
Yeah.
anyways.
Well, and or just the fact that, as we spoke about it earlier, pre-merge plays don't usually factor
Exactly.
into things. Like people could be like, we know he doesn't have an idol. Like now we really know he doesn't have an idol. And nobody's gonna care about this, you know, 15 days down the line or wherever we're at. So I think they'd be wrong. I think that move can absolutely be brought up in a final tribal, but so yeah, he might be okay. I do wonder. I think it depends on if people want him to be okay or not. I think it's
Yeah.
what they if people want to sell that he's a problem, I think they could get some momentum with that, like that he's a threat. But if they want to convince themselves that he's not because they want him to be an ally, I think it'll be easy enough to convince themselves of that too. So yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see.
I'll put it like this. I think that if you wanted to look at pure threat level right now, like let's say somehow we merge this next episode. Obviously, that's not going to happen.
Right.
Let's say, in terms of threat level, despite Kyle partially pulling off this move, I think people would be looking at Star before they would be looking at Kyle because Star has a potential idol,
Right.
has this beware advantage, has the potential of power um, that she has. And I think people will be looking at her despite her not being, maybe as obviously, well, she doesn't have the resume that Kyle already
Mhm.
has, I should say. Um, I think they would still be looking at voting her out first, or at least wasting the idol and maybe splitting votes on her. So,
Yeah. Well, and actually to that point, I think anyone without a vote is at risk in a either a merge or sort of the mergatory
yeah.
stage. Anytime where because I think the very first vote and certainly the vote to like make it to the merge, that vote where tribes are together, but you're not officially at the merge yet. You're not
Hmm.
on the jury yet. Those are the votes where people historically tend to just really adopt that anyone but me approach. And so people who cannot use a shot in the dark because they do not have a vote are juicy, juicy targets
Yeah.
at that stage. And that's probably another reason Kyle maybe wanted to hold on to the steal a vote because the steal a vote can also prevent somebody from using a shot in the dark.
Yeah. True.
And so I mean on one hand maybe it'd be wise to do that here and just to be very open about who you're voting for and what have you, and as long as they don't have an idol, and obviously that may not have worked out for them, they can't use the shot in the dark, and so that's very powerful to just burn that advantage but use it in that way. And he put himself in a position where it was never going to get used in that way because his allies didn't know about it. So that was how that ended. But yeah, I think the people without a vote, where it's known they don't have a vote by anyone who isn't their direct ally, I think are really in trouble when we get to that immediate merge phase. Um, although actually maybe that's why I'm just realizing I think the way that they have it set up with the be aware advantages is you get your vote back at the merge. So I guess it just depends on if the pre-merge um it counts like that phase where they're together but they haven't made the jury.
Yeah.
If that doesn't count as the merge, someone like Star is in a really, really bad spot.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that for sure. All across the board. I agree with it
Yeah.
straight up.
Perfect.
Um, Yeah, but there's like one other thing that I think is very interesting in this sort of pre-tribal scramble, and that is the fact that Shaheen realizes that okay, well, what if Kyle has a medal? They basically decide on Kyle.
Yes.
They go to each of them and they're like, hey, blah blah blah. What do you think? And they're like, I'm willing to vote for the other. And then they go to Camilla and they're like, hey, yeah, we're voting Kyle. Kyle is the one going home. You're staying, we want to work with you, blah blah blah. And they don't really say the same thing to Kyle. At least we don't see that in the episode. And that's especially made clear when they go through Kyle's bag in front of Camilla. And Camilla just kind of has to sit there awkwardly.
Her face in that, like she didn't breathe.
Yeah,
It was fun watching her in that moment.
yeah. And so Shaheen goes through Kyle's bag. And let me just ask you, like, what are your thoughts on looking through bags? Is it cool? Is it not cool?
It's funny because I think it has now become accepted enough that you, as a player whose bag might get searched, kind of need to anticipate it. It's not something I would love doing, but I don't think if I were in Shaheen's position, I can't say I wouldn't because I feel like it has become part of the game now. I will say that whole moment, although that made Camilla feel even more confident that the vote was going to be Kyle. Um, I if I were in her shoes, I would have felt the opposite because I would have been like, how do they trust me enough to do this in front of me unless this is theater
Yeah,
to make me feel confident to not use my shot in the dark or whatever, to make me feel confident that they're voting for this other guy and confident that he doesn't have an idol. Like I would have thought it was theater.
yeah,
And so I think that again, it's because Kyle could reassure Camilla that, and just his reaction to her telling him was enough to reassure her that he was not part of this theater. He was not part of this plan. Then she read it for what it actually was. But it would have scared me in every way. It would have scared me in terms of what if they find his idol, but it also would have scared me is this set up to make me feel at ease because now I don't know who this idol needs to be played on. So yeah, what a wild sequence. And the fact that it was there and they didn't find it.
Yeah, no, that's the craziest part of to me is that the idol is in the bag. Like I would think theoretically, I'm sure it's so hard to actually do, but theoretically, if I were on Survivor, like, and I had an idol, I just wouldn't hide it in the bag. I'd hide it
Yeah.
somewhere else. I don't know. I'd hide it maybe somewhere on the beach, or I'd bury it or something like that. Like theoretically, that's what I would do. It's probably
Mhm.
so hard to actually do that, to be able to get away and find a good hiding spot and be able to get back to it before tribal, blah 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 blah. But hiding it in the bag is kind of crazy to me because if there's any suspicion whatsoever of you having that, they're gonna look through it. But
Yeah.
Kyle got lucky, so
Yeah.
there you go.
What his reaction when she was like, when he was like, "What do you mean they didn't find anything?" It was
Yeah,
so funny, because he was like, "But it was there. It was in my shoe." Like, and so yeah, and that was the other thing when the bag search started. I was like, this beautiful plan is about to get ruined by this, and so
hmm
it wasn't because I like the California Girls Alliance. Like I was very much like I don't want to lose any of these people, but I
yeah,
want the most interesting thing to happen. And I love this plan they've cooked up and I want to see it through. And what a
yeah,
shame it would be if they find an idol right now. I think the fact that the idols are much smaller than they used to be was helpful for sure. And because I think that really happened just so that a fake idol
yeah,
could look like a real idol. I think that was the reason for doing that. But it just being smaller means that if it's tucked in a shoe that's tucked in a bag, maybe it will get missed. So that worked
yeah.
out well too.
No, it did. It's super fun and really goes to show the fact that you know, I guess not everything is certain. Like I would think theoretically, like okay, if someone looks through a bag, they're gonna be able to find whatever they're looking for. Like there's not too
Mhm.
much space there. But I mean, with how small the idols are now, it's not like the early seasons where it's like a giant compass or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's not obvious.
It's not like a slate of something from
Yes, it's
Survivor
not a
China,
literal
like
slate. Yeah, you're right.
or two of them. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, so it's fun. And yeah, so we have this pre-tribal scramble, and it seems pretty obvious to basically all parties involved that okay, Kyle is gonna get the votes, and it's really just a matter when we actually go to tribal council of okay, but between Shaheen and Thomas, who is actually going to go home, and also are they going to use Camilla's extra vote, which she gifts to Kyle, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and smart, because I think that is what guarantees that as long as there isn't a steal a vote used, that guarantees that things work out for him. Because if they steal sorry, if there's not a steal a vote, so Kyle has his idol, and actually even if there is a steal a vote, if they steal her votes, he still has two. If they steal his, he has his idol. So I think that is wise even in that. I think they considered even that. And so yeah, no, I think it all made a lot of sense. I think they truly thought of everything,
Yeah,
which is good. And I loved um trying to figure out then from the editing of Final Tribal what was going to happen. And I know some people got a little stressed because we were hearing so much from Camilla, but and people were saying that it was like an Emmy worthy performance, but I don't really think, aside from when she said that it was going to be her or Kyle, which obviously
yeah.
she knew or at least hoped was not the case. I don't think anything she said was disingenuous.
No, I
And I
didn't
think
think
that's
so.
why there was so much emotion there because she meant every word. And that's why that worked. And then it was like the whole time I was like, neither Kyle nor Camilla is going home. So, and I feel like we're going to hear something to sort of tie the bow on the Survivor experience of whoever is. So I was just sitting there waiting to see who got that
Yep.
moment, because it's
Mhm.
like that is who is going home. And I think that's fun for people who like really know the edit and try and predict the edit. Like it didn't, that didn't take away suspense for me. It just, the moment that of realization just came a little bit sooner, and was fun to then get the payoff.
Yeah, yeah. So at Tribal Council, Kyle and Camilla both talk about, their survivor experiences and what it's meant to them. And both Kyle and Camilla get emotional about it. Camilla especially starts crying. As you said, a lot of people called it a great performance. I agree with you. I don't. I think it's way more of a gray area. I don't think it's the type of thing where like you cry, you legitimately, shed tears
Yeah.
about that sort of thing, unless there is some amount of legitimacy to it all. And I think all of it was legitimate, really.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
I mean, and she knew what she was doing, and she knew
yeah,
that the optics of it would help her case, absolutely. And I mean, any great performance does drive, like, it does, come from reality. So it was a great performance, but it was just like I believed every word of what she was saying. I think she
yeah.
meant it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Jeff asks the ultimate question. He asked the same thing of Thomas.
Yeah.
I'm sure he asked it to everybody. Surely he asked it to
Yeah.
everybody.
Well,
But
and I think it wasn't even that it was asked, it was that Thomas sort of volunteered
yeah.
that, "I know if I were in their shoes, I would feel this way too." Almost, and I adore Thomas, but almost coming off kind of patronizing. Like if I was in their shoes, I would be
Mhm.
so annoyed at somebody saying that. And unless I knew what was about to happen, and you actually saw a reaction on Camilla's face when he said it that way, which
Yeah.
again, so fun to watch when he can't see her face, but she can make that expression kind of to the camera. But yeah, he just sort of volunteered that, and it was just like, I hope you mean it, buddy, because
Yeah.
this is, and I think he did. I think he did too. So
Yeah. Yeah. So we get to the votes, and Jeff asks, "Hey, if anybody has an idol, do your thing."
mhm.
And Kyle stands up and plays it, and makes sure to say that he saw Survivor 46.
Yes. Yeah, which I alluded
And
to earlier. I'm sorry I
yes,
buried the lead.
no, you did not. You buried no lead.
Oh, good.
But
Okay.
he does say this, and I find it interesting. Oftentimes when we talk about Survivor, we talk about building upon what you learned from previous seasons. Some call it, the evolution of strategy or whatever. I think this is a prime example. Like for many seasons, especially in the early-ish New Era seasons, up until Survivor 46, it was all about using your advantage at the right time.
Mhm.
Once again, third time I'll bring up Marianne this episode. Marianne set a precedent in Survivor 42 when she was able to hold on and stay tight with her advantage until literally the end of the game, and quote unquote use it in the best manner for her
Mhm.
story and her game. And since then, people have been trying to do that with their own advantages, hold on to them, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. A good example of this is, all of Survivor 46, obviously, but
All
also
of
like Survivor 43. Dwight Moore holding on to Janine's idol.
or
That
was
was
he?
something. That was something that was all about trying to figure out the best way to use this idol perfectly in a chaotic tribal council instead of just guaranteeing the safety of one person. It was all about we need to get this advantage for the next tribal council. We need to move it around and shift it around so nobody knows where it is, just in case there's a steal your vote or steal the idol advantage, whatever it's called. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but
Or just
after Survivor 46, the fact that everybody on the cast with no exception went home with an idol in their pocket. That's a joke. Um, and people learned. People are learning, and I think they're realizing what I believe is true in the sense that playing an idol well does not mean playing an idol and negating every vote.
mhm,
Sometimes the most important thing and the most smart thing you can do is use an idol when you can
yeah.
and just make sure you make it through that vote.
And I think, a example of that, really not with an idol, but just with an advantage, was the fact that Kyle and Camilla did use the extra vote.
Yes.
That what ended up not being needed, but by doing that, once it was clear there wasn't going to be a vote steal, there was no way either of them was going home.
Yeah.
There was not a chance, because either the majority of the other three's votes were on Kyle, and they had 3 votes on somebody else, or it would be a 3-3 tie, worst case scenario, on Camilla. Kyle is safe, and if Camilla and Kyle are like unwilling to make any changes, then eventually because I think that extra vote keeps getting used and everything. So I think they would have been okay. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it just it was smart, and there was a lot of discourse about, oh, it's too bad they don't still have that, but they secured the path, and I think that makes sense. And I also think playing an idol just to be safe, because I think it comes down to um people who hold on to it because they're like, if I can make it through one more tribal council, then the path is set. It's like everybody else knows that too, right? Or you have to assume
Yes.
that everybody else knows that too. And
Yeah.
so if you know that it's in everybody else's best interest to vote for you, and some of that might come from hubris, you might think it and it's not even true, but
Mhm.
to the best of your knowledge, if you know that that's the best move, I say if you have an idol, you should play it, because the worst case scenario is you look foolish. Even better if at this point it's in front of a jury. But if it's really in front of everybody, it lowers your threat level. It's like, oh,
Yes.
so and so misplayed an idol, like that. No, they don't have their finger on the pulse of this game, and so
Yes.
you've made sure you don't go home, and you've lowered your threat level. Is that really a bad night at tribal council when you think about it?
Lauren, you are touching on something that I adore because I think the exact same thing. I think the best way to get yourself to the end of Survivor legitimately is to misplay an idol. I
Yeah,
mean that legitimately
yeah.
because I mean that for multiple reasons. It lowers your threat level immediately. It makes it so people think you don't have a strategic mind for the game.
Hmm.
And to other people, it's like, well, we have direct evidence of, Joey not being able to know when the right time to play in his advantage of it, when his advantage is. We have a very aware, factual way to say he did not know what was going on during
Hmm.
the Lauren vote or whatever.
Right.
Um, and I think that's great because if you look throughout Survivor history, I've done the research on this. There have been more unsuccessful idol plays than winners before, like the final five or whenever the idols,
Hmm.
expire, than there have been successful idol plays by winners. There's only been one
Interesting.
successful idol play by a winner. That was before, the final five or whatever, and that was by Ben in Heroes versus Healers versus Hustlers, a
Wow.
season where many people, myself included, say should he have had the opportunity to even be able
Right.
to win that
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
Um, but so it speaks to something. It speaks to something about
Yeah.
perception once again and how people perceive you. The idea
Absolutely.
of quote unquote misplaying an advantage because you didn't use it in the
Yeah.
precisely perfect way.
And it's like, if you go home with an idol in your pocket, that is also a misplay. And so if I
Yeah.
had to pick which misplay, I would pick I'd pick the one that keeps me in the game. Because again, you are guaranteeing yourself another day in the game, whether there's a single vote on you or not. And so I don't think it's ever a misplay. And I played an online game once
Mhm.
upon a time called Castaway that I did win. And I had an epic idol misplay in that I suddenly was like, I was like, it would really be in their best advantage to vote me out right now, and so I'm gonna play this just in case. To the point where even the host, when it was like, "Oh, who are you playing it on?" and I was like, myself, like almost sort of gave away that it was foolish.
Yeah.
um, but it was just like they knew that I might have had something, and I know this is an online game, but I immediately was like, I don't think this is that bad, because now people aren't taking me
Yeah.
seriously, and I have time to be taken seriously, and this exact case that we've discussed can get brought up in a final tribal of like, I kept myself safe, and I lowered my threat level, so what's wrong with that?
Yeah. No,
Shout out
you're
to Castaway, and Rob, who hosts it.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a great point. But Kyle plays the idol. And they do indeed vote for Thomas to go home, which, it makes sense.
Mhm.
It's the logical thing to do because unlike Shaheen and unlike Joe, you know that Thomas has something.
Yeah.
There's no way that at this stage in the game he's lying about, having a vote at all. You know that he participated in this excursion, in this journey. And it wouldn't make sense to me, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense to lie about not about having the option not to do it if
Mhm.
if you didn't get an advantage
Right.
there.
Yeah. Or or he lied because he didn't have a vote, which is also a good reason for it to be on him. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I suppose. I
But I
think it
agree.
makes
I
more
think they knew he
sense
had something.
to assume that he has an advantage
Yeah,
though in that
I agree.
instance. So yeah.
I agree. Well, and again, back to Camilla's move earlier, if he did play some form of advantage
Hmm.
that left things in a deadlock, and there was any risk, if I'm miscalculating this, and there was any risk, that, having planted that seed earlier and being able to sell that to Joe and Shaheen that, hey, he lied about this, kind of like what Say did to Cedric about Justin, that might have also been an idea that they had too, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it made sense that it was him. I was sad to see him go, but because I agree, some really great confessionals, just really fun. The type of Survivor quote unquote villain that I like to see. Like I really
Yeah.
don't see him as a villain at all,
No,
but
I don't
like,
either.
but just the in terms of kind of snarky remarks and just good confessionals, sort of biting commentary. I think he was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. Sad to see him go for sure. That being said, I don't think he, is having a rough life out there.
No, he's
He's
doing
on the
good.
Billboard 40 under 40 list, which is kind of crazy.
Amazing. Good for him.
So good for Thomas.
Yeah.
I hope everything's going well. It'd be fun to
Yeah.
see him back on another season. I feel like he's somebody who would be able to grow and learn a lot from their first game. Even
Yep.
though honestly, he really didn't do like anything wrong in this
No.
season. But
No, he really didn't.
you know,
He really
yeah.
didn't. I was sad because the day before that episode aired, I saw a TikTok of Chapel Roan talking about how she might need to watch Survivor again because Thomas was on it. Clearly, she knew
Oh,
him. And
really?
then this episode aired, and so I guess she doesn't need to start watching anymore. And I was just
Uh,
sad because I'm a fan, and I'd love to know that Chapel Roan was watching
it's
Survivor.
kind of like last season when people were like, "Well, if John Lovett's on this season,
Right.
I guess I got to watch Survivor." Then gone
And it's like,
immediately.
guess not.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, okay, that's the episode, and I think it sets up some interesting stuff. Because of the extra vote being used, it's now a 2-2 deadlock between Shane and Joe and Kyle and Camilla. I'll just ask you, Lauren, if they go to tribal council again, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, I think there is an idol on that beach.
Yeah.
And so I think at this point, all four people, or at least three of the four, will immediately know that that's something they should look for. And so I feel like somebody will find it. And I think that will, if they go to tribal council again, be the deciding factor, in all likelihood, unless it's known who has it, but people could play it for each other.
Yeah.
I think it is a very clear 2-2 deadlock. I don't think anyone would want to turn on each other, because there's also a numbers game between their two original tribes. So,
Mhm.
but I also am not sure that they will return to tribal council because I still think that's a very strong group, and
Yeah.
nobody's going to want to throw.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that in all likelihood they won't be returning to tribal council, but if they do, I think that idol is really going to play a role. I think the fact, I mean, it was kind of Chekhov's idol too, like the fact that we were shown it there, but then neither like Cedric, Mary, and Say didn't find it, but a point was made to sort of show it there on that
Yeah.
beach. I do kind of wonder if it will come into play. So
Yeah.
so that's kind of my best guess there.
My guess, if they were to go to tribal council, is that Joe would go home. I think
Mm,
Shaheen would be willing to flip on Joe now that Thomas is gone, and would rather have Joe go home than risk going home in a rock draw or something like
right.
that. I think Shaheen, he values loyalty, but I think now that Thomas is gone, he doesn't want to, perish on a
Yeah.
sinking ship. You know what I mean?
True, and knowing that Joe and Eva are so tight that he wouldn't even be Joe's number 1.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that is a good point. I think, yeah, if push came to shove, you're probably right, but I do think an idol might make other decisions. I could actually see a situation where if Shaheen approached Kyle and Camilla, who are in a really great spot in that I don't think anybody's even going to try to convince them to turn on each other, because if they
yeah,
were going to, it would have happened probably. Um, I could see Shaheen approaching them, and if they became in possession of that idol, them alerting Joe to this fact or just playing it on Joe to get rid of Shaheen, like I think um I if because he obviously was their top target too. So um I do think Kyle and Camilla are in a good spot. But going into that, but I do wonder if that idol will play a role.
yeah. Well, while we're here, I may as well ask the same thing about the two other tribes. So you have the new
Mm.
Logi tribe. You got Eva, Star, David, Charity, and Mary. Who do you think would go home from those five in the next episode if they were to go to tribal?
Yeah. So when they see who has gone home, I think that will make a big difference because
Yeah,
they'll be thinking about numbers from OG tribes. So I think OG Siva will they'll be like, oh, we could take their numbers down more, but OG Logi, right? I don't know why that's the one I keep forgetting.
yeah, yeah. Logi. Yeah,
Will be like, oof, we need to get rid of a Siva. So I feel like Mary's in a good spot.
for
I
sure.
think
Yeah,
it would be like a swing vote situation for Mary because there would be more incentive to either even the score or to get more of a lead there. And then so it kind of comes down to what she wants. So I do think in that like just again and I think Charity and David are probably more likely to recognize that more so than Eva and Star, who I do not think can work together.
yes, I agree
Um,
with that. Yeah,
yeah, and so based on the way that we have seen Eva ingratiate herself with that group, and we haven't seen it from Star, I would think Star would be at risk of going home, but I can't imagine Star hasn't talked to people.
yeah,
And of course also if Star still doesn't have a vote, then all the more reason I think for Star to
true.
be at risk. But obviously if they're concerned she does have an idol, then perhaps Eva's in trouble. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, my thought there is basically I don't think Mary's gonna go home. I
Yeah.
think Mary is in the middle, but people want to work with her. I think
Hmm.
she'll be fine. I think David will be fine. I just don't see him being targeted. He's too well integrated. And I think David and Eva are working together very closely at this point.
They
So
like
I
each
think
other. Yeah.
yeah, they like each other, or at least, Eva and David, it would rather target Charity, and I think would rather target Star than target Eva at this
Hmm.
point. So I don't think Eva's going home either. So to me, that makes it between Star and Charity. And I think it really comes down to Star's advantage and if she's able to solve it, because she is still on the same beach that she was on originally. So she still can solve it. Um, it's just a matter of can Star solve it? Will she have a vote? And more importantly, how will David look at Charity now that Thomas is gone?
Right.
Because David could look at it two ways. He could look at it, well, now that we have a Logi gone, we can just keep going against the Logis. Or, as a less strategic guy, he could be like, well, now that we have a Logi gone, I can focus on getting rid of somebody who I know is duplicitous or whatever,
Hmm.
whatever he'll say. So I could see two camps there. I
Yeah.
honestly kind of think Charity would go home before Star. I think we've just gotten less of Charity, and she strikes me as more of a pre-merge boot than Star does at this point.
Mhm.
But That's just
Yeah.
reading into the edit. I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't think it would be wise,
No, certainly not.
for original Siva. I think they should be thinking numbers, and to have her, if she is still at the bottom of their group, like, fair game, because she doesn't know it. Um, and that's the other piece too, is that, like, I don't think right now that'll get brought to her attention, because I can't see people turning on David. But that's
Mhm.
something that others can kind of use later too, because they have that information. So I don't think Charity would be the smart move. I certainly can see a world where it'll happen. And I was definitely worried about her, because I think she played the tribe swap very well. I think she was getting
Yeah.
along well with people. I think it was a surprise to people when David was talking about how she was at the bottom and was playing so hard and this and that. Because I don't think that's how she was coming off to this new tribe. And I actually
No.
don't think that's how she's perceived in the day to day by her original tribe either. I think that was kind of day one stuff that kind of persisted, because first impressions make a
Yeah.
big impact. But I think she played that really well, and because she was presenting herself and David as, like a voting block, and if she's continuing to speak to David in that way, I do think he's a smart enough guy that he'd be like, rocking the boat unnecessarily here when we can get to emerge with clear numbers might just not make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. And then finally, we have the new Siva tribe of Say, Cedric, Mitch, Chrissy, and Bianca, which I think is interesting because I feel like there's a lot to uncover in this tribe dynamic that we didn't really see.
Mhm.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
I think if Bianca reveals that she does not have a vote, she would go home. I think that's what it would result in. And again, when Siva, original Siva, can see that they can knock it off another number, for original Logie, I think that that's most likely to happen. The other possibility is the scenario you brought up earlier, where Say is willing to flip, and Cedric goes home. I see that more, even in the building of it. I see that more as, if this does happen, we the viewer, it won't be a very clear cut Bianca vote out, because we the viewer saw that brewing, but in reality it is a clear cut Bianca vote out. That's more how I'm reading that edit. Because I just, for the longevity of the game, I think original Logie, now that now that, or sorry, no, I guess, yeah, Say and Cedric are Vulu, so Vula. So yeah, I don't know. I I I feel, I guess it depends. It depends who
Yeah.
they want to work with. I just think Bianca's the easy vote if she reveals she doesn't have her vote. Um,
She's definitely the easy vote. I'll say this. I don't think Say is going home. I don't think Mitch is going to go home. And I don't think Christy's going to go home. I think it leaves it between Bianca and Cedric. Frankly, I don't think Mitch or Chrissy can go home because it would be a 2-2 split. It would have to go to Rocks, or one of them would have to flip on the other. And Mitch has his extra vote.
mhm,
So I'd be really
that's true.
surprised if
I
one of
forgot
the
about
two of
the
them
extra
go home.
vote. Yeah.
So that
Yeah,
being
no,
said,
you know, I can see worlds where Say goes home.
really,
If we see, like, episode 1, Say reveal herself on that beach, and word gets to Cedric that she was telling people not to trust him,
yeah.
I can see Cedric cutting that tie, and I can see people making that decision.
I can't. I cannot
Okay.
see Cedric doing that. I mean, just me
I mean, I think
personally.
Bianca goes home, so but
To me, after Cedric did all that stuff at that last tribal council and said, we didn't see it in the edit, but essentially, told Say to play her idol the episode before last, and
Mhm.
kept Say over Justin, who theoretically should have been his number one. I would be so surprised if Cedric turns on Say, even if Say does throw his name out. I think Say is way more likely to flip on Cedric, and I think with Bianca sort of being essentially a sitting duck, and the fact that Thomas is going to go home from her tribe, I think that lowers the necessity for either tribe to feel like they need to get an original Logie out. And I think Say is going to be so hyper focused on, well, Cedric wrote my name down, that I wouldn't be surprised if Mitch and Chrissy are like, well, you want to get rid of Cedric? Sure, let's get rid of Cedric.
Yeah, but I'm not sure she's necessarily determined to get rid of Cedric. I think she's just
Yeah,
wary of Cedric. I think, and I don't know. I think of all these people, I think Cedric is someone who, even just as a surgeon in his professional life, is somebody who I'm sure time and many times throughout his career has had to go through the process of being like, I made a mistake here. I
yeah,
now recognize I've made a mistake and I can't make that mistake again, and I need to make the right decision now. And I do wonder, because I think everybody kind of agrees that how he handled the, 2 episodes ago, tribal council, mistakes were made, right?
yeah,
One way or the other, mistakes were made. And so I think if he catches wind that now Say doesn't trust him because of that mistake, I think he might be willing to be like, "This isn't what I want, and I feel bad about it, but I created this, and
yeah,
I have a way to eliminate this mistake so that it doesn't continue to haunt me for the rest of the game." I think he might. I think he might be willing to pull the trigger there,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
The fact that
I'll
he was willing to vote her out, even if it was for an ally who's no longer in the game now, the fact that he was willing to write her name down
yeah.
twice, I don't think it's impossible that he does it again.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'll be interested to see.
Yeah.
You know, it's all speculation. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Watch, they won't go to tribal. I mean, I figured that was the tribe going to tribal.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. Yeah,
so and then they ended up winning. Like, what a comeback. Nobody, I think there was so much to that episode that nobody really talked about that comeback.
yeah, it's true.
It
Yeah,
was impressive. And I had written them off. Like, I was like, probably Bianca, like, but who knows what's happening, but this is the tribe that's going to tribal, and then they won the whole thing. It was
yeah,
very impressive.
yeah. Super impressive. You know what else is impressive, Lauren? Is the capacity to vote. Just the ability for us humans to vote on things. I don't know. This is a bad segue.
No, I
What I'm
like it.
getting at is Survivor 50 is, of course, doing their voting for in the hands of the fans, where we get to vote on 3 things once in a while. And that was the case in this past week. And I would just like to share what I did with the newfound voting power that I have in my life. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing where there we go,
Ooh.
where 3 options, and honestly, these ones are a lot more simple than sort of the last one that was after the first episode. That was I think Sunder was on for that particular one, and we had a long discussion about the different potential for swaps and tribe colors and things like that. Or no, swaps is this one. We'll get to it. But this first one is pretty simple. Just the final 4 challenge between Plinko, a long challenge, and the classic ball in the thing, and then they grab the thing.
Right. There is
Um,
a name for it, but I can't remember what it is either.
yeah.
There is
Um,
definitely a very specific name for it. I hate that I can't think of it, but the ball in the thing and they grab the thing. Any Survivor player fan will know what you're talking about. So
yeah, yeah. So these are our only 3 options for this final 4 challenge, which I think is interesting because a lot of people are like, "Oh man, that means that we won't have any other options. It's just going to be this." But I kind of took it like, what if there's also a final 3 challenge, and there's a potential that this is a
Mm.
final 2, and we have the hand on the idol thing from season 1. I think it's a possibility. I'm just throwing it out there. But this is what we had to vote on for the final 4. I personally voted for the ball and the thing and the thing and the thing. Lauren, you told me before the episode that you had not been voting on this necessarily, so I don't know your direct thoughts on this, but that was just my thought.
Yeah,
But
so I
yeah,
believe it is called, Simotion, I believe is the name.
Samotion. Yes, yes.
And I just had to look that up. Yeah, no, I had shared with you that although I agree that it is very important that people get out and vote, and I believe actually we're just like breaking news at the time we're recording this here in Canada, a federal election has been called, and so yes, get out and vote, folks. But I will say, when it came to Survivor 50, I did end up voting the first time we got the chance. I haven't voted for this. It's not something that I guess I was just like, if I'm not voting for who's going to be in this season, I don't care enough about
Sure.
these things to vote, was kind of my standpoint. But that being said, as you're showing me this right now, I also would vote for Simotion. So I guess I do care enough to have an opinion. But no, I'm terrible. I guess I lost my vote, I suppose, because I have not voted for this as of yet. I guess it's just yeah, the tribe colors challenges, even the fire making, yes or no, and I could get into that. I don't love the idea of that being public vote, and so I just wasn't participating, and so I'm definitely not the person that CBS or Survivor wants talking about this cool little opportunity. But
And yet
yeah,
here
I don't
you
know.
are talking
Yeah,
about it. So
yeah.
there you go. Yeah, no,
But I would vote Samotion.
yeah, I think really option B is just like it's every challenge. That is every
Yeah.
challenge. You run through a big thing, you go into mud, and then there's a puzzle at the end. Like that's just not interesting.
Hmm.
Um, Option A I thought is actually a very fun challenge. I like the advanced plinko a lot. But I mean, if you want to celebrate Survivor and you want to do a classic, Samotion is
Yeah.
probably one of the more iconic final challenges in Survivor history. So, yeah, I would definitely vote for that one.
Yeah. With option A, with this Plinko, how much of this is chance? So you just called it advanced Plinko, making me think that there is some, I mean, I know there is some strategy involved, but I guess it's just you have to sort of watch it and catch it. But
Yeah,
there's an element of randomness to it too that I don't know,
it's
Samotion
spatial
is
awareness, I
yeah.
think.
So
But
really it's actually quite similar to Samotion. So yeah, if you have to make a pick, I guess I was picturing Plinko more from like a Price is Right standpoint where it is kind of chance. um,
yeah,
so yeah, I think go with the classic one for sure.
yeah. And then we have the second one, which actually let's just go to the third one first because the second one's more interesting.
Okay.
Tribe swap or no tribe swap. In this particular instance, I personally voted yes to a tribe swap. I think this episode of Survivor is a great example in showing why tribe swaps are almost always more interesting in terms of tribe dynamics and seeing how different people interact. Like it gets more to me personally, Joey Olberding. What I like in Survivor is seeing the dynamics of new people interacting and finding the new little niches and cracks and ways to move forward in the game. I think tribe swaps are great, and so yes, I voted for it.
Yeah, I think I love that I have so many opinions for something that I didn't care to vote for. But I think honestly, the biggest thing here is, and obviously the players would know there's always the chance of a tribe swap anyways, but with things like tribe swap, even fire making challenges, things like that, I don't mind it as long as the players know going in that it's a possibility. And so they
Sure.
can kind of adjust their game accordingly with that in mind. So just the fact that this is up for vote, meaning that they know there's a chance that it could happen, I would rather it happen, because I
Yeah.
think it is fun. But I if somebody's completely blindsided by a brand new twist or an advantage that they previously did not know even existed, that's when I don't love it, because I like when if people have a way to kind of prepare even mentally for something, or to keep their options open because they know about these things. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes, I think it's pretty cut and dry. I don't think there's a lot of people out there who are saying no to the tribe
Right.
swap, if for no other reason than because so much of the new era didn't have swaps. I think
Mm.
people are justifiably a little like ready for some change. And so yeah, I think tribe swap is definitely going to happen. I think it should happen. And yeah, then we have this middle one, which I think is a little more interesting. It's a lot more vague, first of all,
Mhm.
but it's all about the power of advantages. Do you want minimal power? Do you want strategic power, or do you want dynamic power? And the question to ask is, what does this mean? Like, does it mean
Yeah.
anything? But I saw people out there saying, minimal power, no, like, that just means very little advantages, which, seems to be true. But the difference between strategic power being like kind of in the middle and dynamic power, I guess, being sort of what we see nowadays.
Mm.
And people were like, well, in that case, you would always want dynamic power. I personally disagreed, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Lauren, if you have any.
Yeah, I think your question of what does this mean is the biggest question, because I feel like uh, the cynic in me thinks that the Survivor producers uh, could make whatever decision they want and then sell it as one of the two
Yeah.
of strategic and dynamic. And so I'm not sure of the impact of this really, and it's tricky when you don't know exactly what you're voting for here. I kind of feel similar. Like I like the idea that somebody on the bottom, that there can be some sort of Hail Mary play or something that completely shakes up the game. I like, I like to know that if you're never truly dead in this game until your torch is snuffed.
Yeah.
But the middle ground is where I tend to enjoy the gameplay the most, because it's more, how can people take an advantage that's decent and use it most optimally? That's what interests me. Is I want to see the strategic mind use these advantages really well. So I feel like if this is what I think it is, the middle of the road interests me the most.
Yeah, and that's totally and completely valid. To me, I mean, you can see my vote. I
Mhm.
voted minimal, and the reason I voted minimal is honestly a pretty simple one. I don't like to be, sort of knee-jerk reactionary in the way that I vote for these things. Like, I don't want to, because there's been fire making for so long, just assume that, oh yeah, no, I don't want fire making
Mhm.
anymore, or something like that. In this case, though, I kind of do want to see that. I kind of am admitting to myself, like, yes, I am doing a knee jerk reaction and saying that, yes, I want to see minimal power. Because to me, season 50 is obviously a returnee season. The last returnee season was Winners at War, where there was so much strategic power, so many advantages, so much advantage power that it's sort of, I love Winners at War, but it took over a lot of the gameplay and really sort of overshadowed the actual dynamics of the people. And then you look at the last returnee season before that, and it was Game Changers, where the same thing happened, where the advantages and how many advantages were out there totally overtook the gameplay, literally eliminated Suri by
Mhm.
themselves, and overshadowed the actual power of the players. Now, the returning season before that is Cambodia, which is my favorite season. I love Cambodia. And the season, well, skipping Karamoan, also Heroes versus Villains, is my second favorite season. And that's much more in the middle.
Mhm.
But the last returnee season to have quote unquote minimal advantages and power, if you don't, depending on what you think that means, which is obviously open to interpretation, would be Survivor All Stars, which was 20 years ago.
Right.
And I think even if you're of the opinion that, okay, pre-game alliances and pre-game discussions are going to be a big factor on Survivor 50 no matter what, which is something I have to agree with, there's no reason to think that just having more limited advantages, not zero advantages, but more limited advantages won't create an interesting environment because their pregame alliances in Cambodia, their pregame alliances in Heroes versus Villains, certainly. But they didn't really impact the game that much at the end of the day because once Survivor starts, it's its own thing. It's not real life connections anymore, except for the case of Survivor All Stars, which was a very, very extreme case.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I do worry, and that was exactly the point I was gonna bring up, was potential pregame alliances or just people who knew each other already, which, and I mean, those dynamics are always fun to watch. There being enough, advantages and everything, or just the fear of that might be in part what helps
Yeah.
prevent it. And I like that. I think if there were very, very few advantages, I would worry that people would kind of follow some pregame things, and it just certain people just wouldn't have a shot. And I don't love that. I do agree with everything you're saying. And I think we're going to get a really dynamic group of people who are going to make good TV, and they certainly don't need to rely on advantages for good TV. But from like an equity standpoint, when some people might have pre-existing relationships and others don't, I think the advantages mix it up enough that maybe that's part of the reason it doesn't matter. So it'll be interesting to see. I do think, you mentioned Cambodia and that's your favorite. I do think of every returnee season, this one will probably feel most like that, even though we aren't voting for who's coming on. I
Yeah.
think I think in terms of the people they're considering for it and everything, it'll be similar criteria. So I am very excited in that regard, and I think we're going to have some really great players. But I like seeing what people do with advantages.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to see some of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because once again, the language is so vague. The way I interpreted minimal power is essentially like there is an idol on each
Right.
beach.
Yeah.
And that's probably about it. Maybe there's a steal vote, maybe there's that. But to me, like strategic power and dynamic power, those mean like, you have your beware advantages and you have your
Hmm.
journeys and you have your lose votes and you have your steal votes and then you have, your who's what's it's and the split tribal councils and blah blah blah. Like I said, like essentially normal new era gameplay. Like that's what I see when I look at
Hmm.
dynamic power and to an extent strategic power. And minimal power, I think, is the closest to sort of the same set of advantages and the same set of what you would expect to what many people call the quote unquote golden age of Survivor.
Right. That old school. Yeah. I
So
think, and
yeah,
this is funny because now I know I had just said I think my preference would be the middle ground, but a case for either minimal power or like this dynamic new era is depending on the makeup of this cast, which I understand there's going to be a mix of new era and maybe some like older school players and that sort of thing.
yeah,
I do think seeing like true old school survivors have to deal with a beware advantage or go on a journey could be really fun, but similarly seeing some new era people not get any of that would also be really fun. And so maybe I don't want the middle road. I want to see people sweating, like I want to see people like being out of their element and being like, I thought I knew Survivor, but what is this, so
yeah,
that could be
exactly.
fun. Yeah.
Exactly. Like there's no more pure way to describe like how well you are at Survivor than just pure social game. Like there are some players who will do well no matter what, regardless if there's a million advantages or not, because they're just that good at
Hmm.
social dynamics. Sari will always, if nothing else, control a tribe or will be well liked or won't be targeted by the majority. Parvati is not going to is going to be able to weasel her way out of any situation. Like that's just how it goes. And minimal power just in season 50, I think would best show who the actual best players in Survivor history are and who maybe I wouldn't say aren't as good, but were maybe circumstances more of their particular seasons, or if nothing else, can't
Yeah.
replicate their own game,
But
which
I
I
think,
think, yeah,
yeah, I guess it's like it are really sociable, charismatic people. Like, is that what defines the best survivor? Like,
it's a good question. It is a
so I
good
don't know.
question.
But I mean, because I don't disagree with you, like with your examples, and I do think that those people are very good at the game of Survivor. But and although I don't have as much fun enjoying like just these massive physical threats just tear the way through a game, one could argue that that gets you there just as
Yeah,
much, right?
that's a good
So
point. Yeah.
And so, you know, somebody who is good at looking for things and using them at opportune times. It's you know what? You know what we're really describing is like somebody from like each of those categories would make a really good escape room team, you know? The people that like
Sure.
find the things, the people that can kind of organize the people that like are the doers, but I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, I think it's somebody that can do a little bit of all of it who is the most well-rounded player. But um, social game is so huge, and I don't discount that. And it's the most fun to watch. Just watch these people work. But
Yeah.
some people don't have that riz, you know, and I think it's good to have something else in your pocket instead.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I imagine that minimal power won't be voted for either way. I just did want to state
Yeah.
my case for it. But yeah, that's basically all. That's all we had to vote on. And I think we talked a very good amount about the episode. But do you have any final thoughts, Lauren?
No, I think you let me share every thought in my head, and I appreciate the time. And I hope we didn't go over time or anything. I did take a
Nope.
quick look at your first few episodes, and I was like, my goal is to be longer than those, and I think we are. So I've
Yes,
won.
we are. New record. New record.
All
Great
right, let's
job.
go.
Um, all right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.